Michael is a retired primary school teacher and a native of Coolani, now living in County Meath. He holds a PhD in history from Trinity College, Dublin, and local history has been his passion. He first published a book called Killeoran and Coolani, a local history, way back in 1985. And since then, he has gone on to publish several critically acclaimed books on the troubled period between 1913 and 1923 in his native county of Sligo, which one commentator described as a highly successful marriage of political, social and economic history. So Michael will now talk to us about the political prisoners in Sligo Gaol. Michael.
Thanks very much, Colin, and thanks to the Hawkswell for inviting me here. I'm delighted to any excuse to come to Sligo, and thanks to all of you for turning out in such large numbers tonight. The bad news is that you're sentenced to 35 minutes of me, and I hope it won't be hard labour. I'm going to talk about Sligo Gaol, especially during the period I'm most familiar with, which is 1912 to 1923, and recount some of the people who were associated with the jail and some of the exciting events that took place involving the building during that time. When Sligo Gaol was closed in June 1956, some Sligo Corporation councillors were reported as welcoming the closure, as they felt Sligo Gaol was a symbol of slavery and the conquest of Ireland. I doubt if this was a widely held view. It is true that serving a term of imprisonment was regarded as a badge of honour by political activists, and a valuable asset indeed in the furtherance of their nationalist political careers. The Nationalist MP for South Sligo constituency from 1900 to 1918 was John O'Dowd, a shopkeeper from Bunnanan. He had been imprisoned in November 1881 for Land League activities. He served most of the 6-month term in Dundalk Jail, but for some reason he spent January 1882 in Sligo Jail. His offence is given in the Sligo Jail register as being suspected of being guilty of a crime punishable by law. So he wasn't actually put on trial because he was put in jail under Chief Secretary Forrester's Protection of Person and Property Act 1881, which allowed imprisonment without trial. John O'Dowd had a volume of verse published in 1888 called Lays of South Sligo. A couple of these poems had subtitles noting they were written in either Sligo or Dundalk Jail. Later he had poems occasionally published in the local press, especially the Sligo Champion. He supported John Redmond's attitude to the war and recruitment, and in late 1915 he had 2 pro-war poems published in the Sligo Champion. One celebrated the Irish Victoria Cross recipient Mike O'Leary from Cork, and the other celebrated Captain Willie Redmond MP, the brother of the Irish leader who had just joined the war effort. And that poem he called Old Ireland's Brave Boys, and here's a sample, 4 lines of it. All hail to our heroes, old Ireland's brave boys, who've left their loved country, her sorrows and joys, and gone to fair Flanders to gallantly fight for God and their country, for freedom and right. So it's unambiguously pro-war and pro-recruiting. But then a strange thing happens. O'Dowd seemed to think that his nationalist credentials needed stressing, so he had 2 of his older poems republished in the Sligo Champion very soon afterwards. One called The Returned Exile, clearly marked as written in Sligo prison, and another one called 82, marked written in Dundalk prison. The theme of neither poem had any current relevance, so I have no doubt that the purpose of the republishing of these poems was to remind his constituents of his nationalist credentials and his jail term for the cause. It may not have been a coincidence that there had been some publicity for Alec McCabe in South Sligo at the same time. McCabe was a member of the IRB and the Irish Volunteers and had been campaigning against recruiting. He was dismissed as principal of Drumnagranshi National School, Caish, by his parish priest in October 1915, around the same time. The reasons the priest gave included irregular attendance at school, absence of school without the parish priest's permission, and then, and I quote, a recognised associate and leader of an objectionable and political society in the parish which has been the cause of disunity and outrage. Just over a week after being sacked, Alex McCabe was arrested at Sligo railway station with a bag of gelignite and a loaded revolver. He was charged under the Defence of the Realm Act and he was remanded in custody to Sligo Gaol. He was removed then to Arbour Hill military barracks in Dublin, and at a subsequent trial in Dublin, a jury acquitted him. McCabe, of course, standing as a Sinn Féin candidate, defeated John O'Dowd in South Sligo in 1918 election, having by that time a much more impressive catalogue of jail sentences, which included in 1918, he got 7 days in Sligo jail for contempt of court, 3 months in Mountjoy for unlawful assembly. In 1919, 3 months in Sligo for unlawful assembly and soliciting contributions to Dáil Éireann. In 1920, 3 months in Sligo and more in Mountjoy for the same crime. But the main business of Sligo Jail wasn't political, of course. On the same page of Sligo Jail register as John O'Dowd in 1882 is Martin, a 24-year-old waiter, black hair, blue eyes, fair complexion, serving 1 month for stealing a vest from the Imperial Hotel Sligo. And 2 women, Margaret and Winifred, whose occupations are given as prostitute, 22 and 17 years of age, on remand on a charge of wandering abroad without any visible means of support. Both women were discharged when brought before the court. When McCabe was in Sligo Jail in November 1915, a 35-year-old labourer, Peter, from Pound Street, Sligo, was on remand charged with driving a cart without a light. He got 7 days or a fine, and he seems to have spent 4 days in jail and paid a fine for the other 3 days. There were also 2 women from Longford, Anne and Kate Anne, aged 29 and 31, and they were serving 1 month each for, quote, loitering for the purposes of prostitution. One of those had a child in prison with her. These details are now available, of course, because we have so many relevant original sources, which can be consulted, many online, some free, some by subscription. These include the Sligo prison registers in the Irish prison registers 1790 to 1924, the witness statements in the Military Archives Dublin, and the 1901 and 1911 census records. The 1911 census includes a return for Sligo Jail, listing the prisoners who were in the jail on the night of the 2nd of April 1911, their details, crimes and sentences. Interestingly, only the initials of the prisoners are recorded, and the same is true for those recorded in asylums on that night. It's an unexpected example of sensitivity at the time. There were 45 prisoners in Sligo Jail on that night, 40 male and 5 female. All but 2 of the males were Catholics. Drunkenness is mentioned in only 8 sentences, 6 male, 2 female. Sligo Jail served a wide geographical area. 11 of those prisoners were from Sligo County, 10 from Leitrim, 8 from Longford, 7 from Fermanagh, 5 from Donegal and 3 from Roscommon. Of the 5 female, 2, 50 years old each, were serving 1 month for drunkenness. 2, aged 30 and 32, were serving 6 months for neglect of children and assault and ill-treatment of children. Both were from Sligo. None of the 4 women could read. The other female was serving 3 months for larceny. All those women were married. Of the males, over half, 28 out of the 40, were labourers. Then there were 2 farmers, 7 shopkeepers and traders. There was 1 cattle drover, 1 horse trainer, and 1 itinerant musician who was a violinist. And the crimes that the men were serving, there was 1 man serving 18 months for robbery with violence. 7 were serving 12 months for crimes like breaking and entering, manslaughter and wounding. 10 of the men were serving 6 to 9 months for assault and robbery, wounding, cattle stealing, larceny, neglect of children, stealing boots. 12 were serving 1 to 4 months, malicious damage, assault and threats, drunken disorderly, larceny. And 7 were serving 7 to 14 days for vagrancy, drunk, wandering and begging, stealing socks, and 1 was in jail for stealing a shirt and drawers. The profile of the male were, there was 1 in his 70s, 3 in their 60s, 4 in their 50s, 8 in their 40s, and 24 in their 20s and 30s. The one over 70 was actually John, a 73-year-old agricultural labourer from Granard who couldn't read and was serving an 8 months sentence for assault. So behind each one of those initials in the census return is a story. And sometimes using local newspapers and checking court cases, you can find out more about them. For instance, Kate lived in Sligo town with her husband, who was a pig dealer. She was the mother of 6 children. She was 32 years old, 5'3", brown hair, blue eyes, fair complexion. She had old scars on her upper lip and forehead. She had various initials tattooed on her hands and arms, and also an anchor and a crucifix with the letters RIP. Her 7-month-old son was with her in jail on census night. Kate and her 10-year-old daughter Mary had been found wandering in Sligo by 2 policemen on the night of 21st of February 1911. Kate was under the influence of drink and Mary was barefoot and very distressed. The child told the policeman that her father had gone to the fair of Eclair and that her mother had struck her with a twig. That's a sweeping brush. The child refused to stay in the house and the policeman took her to a neighbour's house. The following day, the father brought the child to the barracks. There were 8 wounds on her left arm, 3 bruises across her chest, and blood oozing from her ear. The child said the mother had beaten her. Kate was said to have been previously imprisoned for 6 months for ill-treating her children. And checking Sligo Gaol register, it's possible to trace her jail career. She was released on this charge in August 1911. In October 1911, she got 28 days for assaulting a neighbour. March 1912, she got 28 days for wandering abroad and begging. May 1912, she got 7 days for riotous and indecent behaviour. And then there's a gap. Until January 1917, she got 7 days for assaulting a neighbouring woman. And she doesn't appear again in Sligo Gaol register. So you just wonder what happened after that. Of course, the Sligo Gaol register is only available until 1924. I looked at the register for all those committed to Sligo Gaol during September 1915, 100 years ago. There were a total of 51 committed to jail during that month. 31 of those were male, 20 were female. 25 of the cases involved drunkenness, 9 males, 16 females. And 12 of all those were from Sligo. 20 were serving less than a month, mostly 7 days, and most of those were on drunken disorderly charges. It's wartime, of course, in 1915, so there's a new crime, deserting, or being absent without leave from the military. And there were 4 on remand for this, and they were usually handed back to the military. Of the females, the 20 females, 16 involved drunkenness, and 5 of the 20 involved neglect of children. And we notice in this the decrease in the proportion of males, and this may be accounted for by the war. Sligo merchant Francis Nelson told a Northern Unionist at the end of February 1916, when he was asked about enlisting, he said, and I quote, "All the corner boy class has gone," meaning they had enlisted. And perhaps it's this corner boy class, as he called them, were the most likely ones to get into trouble with the law. The changes which came after the 1916 Rising, with the rise of Sinn Féin in 1917 and 1918, and the subsequent War of Independence, meant jails had to deal with a new situation, one for which they weren't really prepared. And like the other arms of the government, they found it difficult. The The governor of Sligo Gaol at this time was William James Reid, Church of Ireland, born in Dungannon, County Tyrone. The chief warder in Sligo Gaol was David Hegarty, a Cork-born Catholic. This was typical of the administration, where the top positions were generally held by non-Catholics, but the rank and file and lower officers were Catholic. From mid-1917 to 1919, with the spread of Sinn Féin, there was a general campaign of what could be termed passive resistance, challenge to authority, including meetings, drilling, marches, seditious speeches. There was usually no resistance to being arrested, and defendants generally didn't recognise the court. Sentences ranged from 1 to 6 months. For instance, some men from Gurchin were imprisoned for unlawful assembly in July 1917 for celebrating the Sinn Féin election victories in South Longford and East Clare. Sinn Féin's Conacre campaign of February 1918, which involved taking grazing farms and letting them for Conacre at a set price of £4 per acre among local small farmers, usually Sinn Féin club members, resulted in 24 prosecutions involving about 150 identified leaders. And these were usually jailed, some in Sligo, and then they were transferred to Mountjoy or some other Irish prisons. We've already heard about Michael Collins being in Sligo Gaol in April, May 1980. Michael Collins, aged 27, 5'9.5 inches, born in Clonakilty, occupation accountant, weight on arrival 172 pounds, that's 12 stone 4 pounds. Weight on departure 173 pounds, so he puts on 1 pound in Sligo Gaol. His offence, committed in Granard, so that's why he's in Sligo, did incite to raid for arms and to carry off and hold same by force. Bail was eventually put up for him and he was released on bail. During this period, there was almost a sense of a game between the authorities and the Republicans, with the Sinn Féiners untroubled by being jailed. In November 1917, Sligo RIC head constable Murphy, reporting one of these incidents, said of William Pilkington and Jim Kirby, "No doubt they are anxious to be prosecuted in order to gain a little notoriety." Having served a period in Sligo Gaol was seen as a necessary apprenticeship and helped develop a sense of commitment and comradeship among those who were prominent in Sligo Sinn Féin and later in the IRA. These included Billy Pilkington, Jim Hunt, Alec McCabe, Pádraig O'Donnell, Owen Tansey, Michael Nevin, John Lynch and many more. This phase seemed to continue longer in Sligo than in some of the more active counties, and was probably a factor in Sligo being less active during the War of Independence. It was common to transfer political prisoners from Sligo and serving longer sentences. They were usually sent to Mountjoy, Derry or Belfast, places that were probably seen as better able to cope with such prisoners because of their size or geographical positions. For instance, Patrick Dyer from Tubbercurry, convicted in 1915 of having anti-recruiting documents in his possession, served his sentence in Mountjoy. He would have been remanded in Sligo, of course, first. Many of the Conacre prisoners that I mentioned of 1918 served their terms in Mountjoy or Belfast. When Sligo prisoners went on hunger strike for political treatment in mid-November 1918, they were sent to Derry Jail. Frank Carty, whose rescue I'll talk about later, was apparently about to be transferred to Derry Jail when he was rescued in July 1920. When he was recaptured that November, he was sent straight to Derry, but he was rescued from there as well. When he was caught later in Glasgow, he was sent to Dublin, and he was imprisoned in Mountjoy at the time of the truce. It's interesting to note as well, in Sligo Jail Register, that in March and April 1920, about 18 ordinary prisoners were transferred from Belfast Jail to Sligo Jail to make up, presumably, for the political prisoners that were going in the other direction. One of those imprisoned in Sligo Jail in October 1980, 18-year-old Stephen Donnelly from Ballina, said that his experience in Sligo Jail was not very pleasant. He said he was treated as an ordinary prisoner, and he gives an idea of the regime in the prison at the time. Out of bed at 6 o'clock, wash, empty slops, clean and polish cell utensils. 8 a.m. breakfast, mug of cocoa, a thick lump of hard bread and a piece of margarine. From 10 to 12, they cut timber for firewood, which was sold at a penny a bundle. Then dinner, 3 potatoes, a bit of beef or mutton, and a mug of what was supposed to be soup. From 2 to 4, they marched around the exercise yard, 5 paces apart, not allowed to talk to each other. At 5 p.m, they had tea or cocoa, bread and margarine. After tea in their cells, the prisoners were given what he called a sort of ropey stuff, bits of rope, I think, and had to tease this. And this is what was called picking oakum, which was referred to already. And at 8 o'clock, lights went out. About 3 weeks after his arrival in Sligo, Stephen was brought before Governor Reid, and he was told that one of his brothers, Edward, had just been killed in France. The war was still going on. The governor told him if he signed an undertaking to cease all illegal activities, he would release him. He refused. Donnelly then went to a Derry jail when they went on hunger strike. Derry jail was a paradise compared to Sligo. They were allowed out of their cells from 9 a.m. until 5 p.m. They were permitted to eat together in one large cell and to stay together until about 8 p.m, he said. We have 2 accounts from the end of 1919 from 2 people who spent time in Sligo jail. Sean McKeown, later very prominent in the Free State Army and in the Cumann Gael and Fine Gael political party, and ran against De Valera a number of times in presidential elections. He served 2 months there from November 1919. Again, he's from Longford, and that's why he was sent to Sligo. His experience of the jail was quite positive. When a demand was made for political treatment, he said, quote, "The governor was very favourable and went a long way towards meeting our demands." And he says as well, "I succeeded in being released on the 28th of December, having spent Christmas Day in Sligo jail. It was one of the most enjoyable Christmas days I ever spent. All doors were open during the Christmas season." At the very same time, Bridget O'Mullane, a prominent Cumann organiser from Sligo, was in Sligo jail serving 2 months hard labour for unlawfully using language calculated to lead to a breach of the peace. She refused to do any work, and she spent the 2 months, which included Christmas, in solitary confinement. She was not allowed to see her father, James Mullane, who was serving a 3-month sentence in the jail. He was an RIC pensioner, born in Clare, but he had a drapery shop in Sligo. And she says, "I found I was left completely alone every night in a separate wing, which contained the condemned cell and the gallows, as the wardress was afraid to stay. The nights I passed on my plank bed there were veritable nightmares." When Christmas Day came, she says she was looking forward to some addition to the usual prison fare, but got nothing at dinner time. During the afternoon, though, a lovely Christmas dinner arrived from the Ursuline nuns, who provided all the political prisoners with similar fare. She said, "That dinner stands out in my memory, and my gratitude to the kind nuns was unbounded." So that's one of the reasons why Sean McKeown had such a wonderful Christmas Day there as well, I think, the Ursuline dinners. I think you can sense in these accounts the difficulties Sligo jail had in dealing with these political prisoners. Bridget O'Mullane was probably the first female political prisoner there, and the governor probably thought he was doing her a favour by keeping her apart from the other women prisoners. Then we come to the most famous event as regards Sligo jail in the War of Independence, the Frank Carty rescue. Words are important here, because it's not the Frank Carty escape, because he was taken out or rescued by the IRA. This was a great example of careful planning and execution. It was seen as evidence of the skill and courage of the IRA. It was a great embarrassment to the government that an important prisoner could be taken from under their noses without anyone raising the alarm or any shots being fired. Sligo IRA did not distinguish themselves during the War of Independence by their activity. There are very few accounts of activities against the British during this period for Sligo town and North Sligo, especially after the Cliffany ambush and the capture of those arms by the British. And yet, this operation was an outstanding success, involving IRA members from Sligo Town, North and South Sligo. It's ironic that Billy Pilkington was in charge of the operation which freed Frank Carty. The two seem to have been rivals all through the period and even into the Civil War, even though they both took the anti-treaty side. There's little evidence of any cooperation between the two men at any stage. Carty is said to have been furious when Pilkington was made OC of the 3rd Western Division at the truce time, and he had to be satisfied with OC South Sligo Brigade. Carty was scathing of the way Pilkington managed the Griffith meeting in April 1922, between the treaty and the outbreak of the Civil War, calling it a tragedy. This added to the rift between himself and Pilkington and influenced his action at the start of the Civil War, when he went into action without any sanction from or cooperation with his divisional commander, Pilkington. And I quote from what Carty said, "I had strongly before my mind the way the divisional staff had mishandled the situation on the occasion of Arthur Griffith's meeting in Sligo." There is also the question of the authorship of the rescue plans. In Carty's account of his activities during this period, he says that he heard he was to be transferred to Derry for trial, and that he, quote, "communicated plans for my escape to Brigadier Pilkington. And on the 22nd of June, members of the IRA under Brigadier Pilkington and the late Brigadier Shem Stevens TD effected an entry into the prison, and having held up the night warder and obtained his keys, they smashed open my cell door and secured my release." So Carty claims to have formulated the plans. Sean McKeown, in his account of being in Sligo Gaol in 1919, said he made a plan of the prison, and with the help of a warder called Stephen Clement, who was the prison carpenter, made escape plans. This plan, he says, was sent out of the prison to Billy Pilkington, the brigade OC, and it was eventually utilised at a much later date for the rescue of Carty and other prisoners. On my release, I discussed this with Pilkington. So McKeown claims to have made the plans. Michael Nevin, who was information officer of Sligo Town IRA, says that as part of a rescue plan, he contacted our prison warder, Stephen O'Connor. O'Connor had been a warder in Mountjoy, but he was transferred to Sligo, possibly because he became under suspicion in Dublin. He agreed to carry the key of Carty's cell and to hand it to the rescuers when they entered the jail. In return, they were to tie him up to avoid any suspicion falling on him. Jack Brennan was one of those who came from South Sligo in response to a request from Pilkington for 10 strong men. He was one of 13 men who crossed the outer prison wall by a wooden ladder and climbed down on the inside by a rope ladder. Brennan says some of the rescue force went to the governor's residence within the jail and got the keys of the cells from him. Carty's cell was then unlocked, and on a signal, a door in the perimeter wall was broken down by a group waiting outside with sledges and pickaxes, and they got out. So it's not certain where the key came from that opened the cell. It was either got from the friendly warder or from the governor. And my own opinion is that it was got from the inside man, Warder O'Connor. Carty's statement about smashing open his cell door is certainly not correct, because they used the key to open it. And I've seen in accounts on the internet and elsewhere that the rescuers broke into the jail by demolishing the gates, and this is certainly mistaken. But the whole thing is a good example of how difficult it actually is to figure out exactly what happened, when the memories of the people involved can be a little bit askew as well. I love, by the way, the delightful bureaucracy of the entry in Sligo Gaol register. Francis Carty, 23 years, 6 foot 1 inch, black hair, blue eyes, fresh complexion, £206, that's 14 stone, 10 pounds on entry. And they even fill in the on discharge column that he was £212, which is 15 stone, 2 pounds. So he put on £6. So how they figured out what weight he was when he left, I'm not quite sure, but he may have been weighed every second day or something like that. And there's also a lovely note then on the release column saying, and I quote, and I love the details, rescued by raiders, 2 a.m, 26/6/20. So the bureaucracy must be correct. One of the most fascinating things about the Carty rescue is the fact that his father, John Carty, had also been in Sligo Gaol in 1928, the same time as Frank, serving 2 months for assault and threats, not connected with politics. John had been released on the 24th of May, a month before the rescue. John Carty had served prison terms previously in 1910 for shooting and wounding 2 men in a dispute about Bob. Frank, his son, gave evidence in that trial. In fact, in the census record for Sligo Gaol for 1911, John Carty is there. There's a JC there, and it's certainly him. In 1913, he served a month for contempt of court after failing to appear when summoned by Percival of Templehouse for illegally cutting turf on his estate. Of course, Carty was in jail for the arms raid on Percival's house at Templehouse. John Carty had also served 1 month at the end of 1919 for threats to his wife, Ellen. There was, of course, another Sligo prison rescue just before the truce in 1921, which in some ways was more impressive than the Carty rescue, since more or less the same methods were used. A military guard was on the jail for the second rescue, and 3 leading IRA officers were rescued. The 3 were battalion OCs, Thomas Dignan in Riverstown, Frank O'Byrne Collooney, and Charlie Gilday Turricurry. Dignan had been involved in the killing of 2 policemen at Ballasadair railway station, and it was feared he might be identified and sentenced to death. The plans again included scaling the wall by a ladder, getting down inside by a rope ladder, and opening the cell and passage doors with a key. It seems that the sympathetic warder Stephen O'Connor brought out the impression of a key which was supposed to open the 4 cells. A key was made, and Michael Nevin slipped the key to Charlie Gilday during a visit. And outside in the foyer you can actually see some of those keys, and I was surprised by the size and how difficult it might be to bring it in and slip it to Charlie Gilday during a visit. This time there seems to have been at least 5 unsuccessful attempts at rescue. In one attempt, 4 IRA members, including Pilkington, got into the jail, but found the key they had wouldn't open the door to the cell lock. They got out again without any trouble. Nevin, in his reminiscences, says that he thought that Stephen O'Connor, the warder, might have deliberately made a mistake with the key in order not to be involved again. A successful attempt was made on the 29th of June 1921. This time there was inside help from a temporary warder called Joseph Henry, and possibly another called Hines, who either left a door open inside or actually opened the 4 cells for the rescuers. This time 3 rescuers climbed the wall, a wooden ladder on the outside, rope ladder on the inside. Another 3 stayed on the wall on watch. And all got out of the jail by the ladders this time. There was no door broken down. Warder Henry was tied up to cover up his part in the operation, and the 3 prisoners were spirited away as far as the graveyard, which was a kind of a meeting place where there were 3 bicycles waiting for them. When Carty escaped, I think he was taken by car to the Clunacool area. These 3 cycled to the Beltra area and up into the Ox Mountains. The county inspector, in his report on this escape, blamed the military for the escape, saying that there was a military guard in the prison at the time, but the guards were asleep. The truce came into effect on the 11th of July 1921, very soon after that rescue, and the War of Independence ended. But then after the treaty split, early 1922 saw confusion. And there was confusion as regards court systems. The regular British courts, such as the Petty Sessions courts, continued to operate, but also there was a resurgence of Sinn Féin courts. These had been established around 1920, but they had only operated sporadically before the truce. After the truce, they were freer to operate. And it's interesting to note in the Sligo Gaol register that some people were sentenced to terms in Sligo Gaol from these Dáil courts, especially from Sligo Parish Court, which was the opposition, if you like, to the Petty Sessions Court. The man in charge of those courts seems to have been Michael Nevin, who himself served a term in the jail and was one of those people involved in the two rescues. In the January to June 1922 period, tension was rising between pro and anti-treaty IRA, and an election meeting in Sligo on Easter Sunday, to be addressed by Arthur Griffith, was a potential flashpoint. Sligo town was held by the anti-treaty IRA under Pilkington, who had prohibited the meeting. During the previous Thursday night, a column of provisional government pro-treaty troops, led by Alex McCabe, entered Sligo under cover of darkness and took up position in Sligo Gaol. The meeting itself went off without much trouble, and the jail post was the first provisional government Free State pro-treaty troop post in the town. In the following weeks, pro-treaty troops from the jail established other posts in Sligo, including the courthouse, which was to be a key position at the outbreak of the Civil War in Sligo at the end of June 1922. So to go back to where we started, with symbols of slavery, what sort of symbol was Sligo Gaol in April 1922? Pro-treaty troops, Irish troops under Irish officers, were now in command, and Alec McCabe was now the officer in charge of Sligo Gaol, a place where he had been imprisoned many times during the previous 8 years. So it was a symbol of Irish independence achieved? Perhaps. But I'm sure the anti-treaty side, Pilkington, Carty, Nevin, etc., saw it as a continuation of what had gone before, with the pro-treaty side taking the place of the British as, in their eyes, the oppressors. Some of them, indeed, were again imprisoned in Sligo Gaol under the new regime. But even in the chaos of the early months of the Civil War, ordinary life and ordinary crime went on as usual. A 20-year-old pig jobber, Stephen, who had a scar on his nose, was jailed for 3 months for the larceny of one overcoat valued 3 guineas for Messrs Johnston, Sligo. And 2 brothers from Leitrim, Bernard and Michael, aged 17 and 19, Bernard had a cast in his right eye, were in Sligo Gaol for illicit distillation. Both those 2 were released on payments of fines of £12, 10 shillings each. For these, and for countless others like them, nothing much had changed, and the question of what Sligo Gaol was a symbol of didn't even arise. Thank you very much.